Why I organized this program and why this particular speaker. I can talk about that for a semester. I teach a course on almost that subject. But I would mention a few things, and then I introduce the speaker tonight. For those of us who were in academia for a long time, one issue which was always part of at least my training in general was that religion and spirituality is either very private or it's on its way out. This was part of the modernization theory and modernity as a social science. We were told that as modernity comes, religion goes out. I think Professor Huntington told us a long time ago, before he became famous, to reintroduce religion in world politics again. So for that reason, I would argue that not only religion is back, it never left, but more than ever before, it is part of the public life and also part of the political life, both here and abroad. Since the Iranian Revolution in 1979, the role of religion in world politics has changed. In fact, one of the most important factors in shaping international politics today is the preoccupation of not only people in the third world in looking into religion as a force of political mobilization, cultural revitalization, cultural revival, but also a major preoccupation for the Western world or the Christian world in dealing with the rest of the humanity, especially when it comes to the Islamic world. So for that reason alone, that is the reemergence of the role of religion in world politics, I think we have enough justification to have this gathering. But more important than that, perhaps, is the future of an emerging community in the United States and in the West in general, and particularly in the United States, the Muslim community, and how it relates to its broader community called the Judeo-Christian community in the United States, and how that interaction between these two communities would have an impact on the American perceptions of the world and how they behave not only internationally but also towards this new emerging community in the United States. And no other person, I think, in this world that I know is more qualified to talk about this subject than our guest speaker tonight, John Esposito. I don't know how to introduce him, so I will do justice to his contribution. I can talk about his books. He has about 20 books, I think. I can talk about his academic background, his degrees, but I think perhaps more than anything else, I see him as a person who has dedicated his life to a better understanding between two important communities, not only here, but around the globe. And I would say this with certainty, that his contribution to the Muslim community in particular, in the United States and abroad, has been more than any other Muslim scholar or otherwise in the last 10 years. He is professor of religion and international affairs and professor of Islamic studies. He is founding director of Muslim-Christian Understanding at Georgetown University. He got his degree in 1974 from Temple University in Islamic Studies and Comparative Religion. Some of his most famous books that many of you who are my students know by heart: Islam and Politics, 4th edition, Islam, the Straight Path, which considered to be one of the best introduction book to Islam by a non-Muslim. Islam, Gender and Social Change, Political Islam, Revolution, Radicalism or Reform, Religion and Global Order, Islam and Democracy, and I would say one of his most important contribution is the Oxford Encyclopedia of the Modern Islamic World, which is in the 4th volume, and I'm hoping that future volumes would come out pretty soon. I don't want to waste your time and embarrass him, although he told me yesterday that he would not be embarrassed easily. It's my great pleasure to introduce you a great friend and a great scholar and a man of wisdom, John Esposito.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that very generous introduction. You know, I was thinking when I was sitting in the audience how much things have changed. In 1967, when I first went to graduate school for a doctorate, the chairman of the department suggested that I take a course in Islam. And I remember my reaction was, why? I knew very little about Islam, I knew very little about Arabs, and what I knew didn't necessarily motivate me to want to learn more. And then I began to study with one of the Muslim professors who came there and decided that I was going to get my doctorate, to which the reaction was, on the part of my mother, you'll never get a job. She was very close to correct on that. On the part of my colleagues, why would you ever do anything like that? You know, they called it going into the abracadabra field, training yourself. I used to kid and say in those days it was like announcing to your mother you were going to be a shepherd in the United States or in New York. I mean, it just didn't make any sense at all. At a certain point, my mother asked me to ask my professor, my Muslim professor, what his children were going to be. And he had 5 children. This was Ismail al-Faruqi. And Ismail told me what he wanted his children to be. Since I told my mother, physician, scientist, engineer. And so my mother said, now go back and tell him if none of his children are going to be scholars of Islam, why does she want an Italian-American Catholic to study Islam and to be unemployed? So, as I grew up in New York, which is a very cosmopolitan area, for as far as you could walk, there were no mosques. One didn't even have a sense of a mosque. If you thought of a mosque, it was something that was overseas. If you did think of a Muslim, it was somebody who was overseas. When I finished my degree in 1974, I discovered what it meant to go into near unemployment. And it was for 5 or 6 years in which there was absolutely no interest in Islam. I obtained a job teaching everything but Islam. I would send out book proposals, maybe 100, 97 wouldn't answer. The other 3 would say, great idea, but there's no market. If you looked at most colleges and universities, you didn't find Islam in the curriculum. High schools and grammar schools, forget it. And look at where we are today, only 20, 25, 30 years later. I have trouble saying 30 years later. It sort of ages me, so I'll say 20, 25, 30 years later. We no longer talk about Islam and the West. We have to talk about Islam in the West. Within my center, we have a special division or program. In fact, we have a conference coming up in April. It's actually, the conference is being called Muslims of the Diaspora. We decided not just talking about sort of Muslims in the West. We have Islam as the 2nd or 3rd largest religion in the United States and in Europe. So it's not only Islam as a global reality, 1.2 billion Muslims, more than 56 Muslim countries, but Islam is now part and parcel of the United States and of Europe. As I like to say, it's late in coming and late in realization, but in many ways, to use poor syntax in English, Muslims are us. Not just us as part of the global community, us as Americans, or it would be us as Brits, us as French citizens. This is indeed a remarkable reality. How are we going to respond to this? How will we all respond to this? How will we face the reality that Islam is both a global and domestic presence, and a global and domestic force, and therefore a global and domestic challenge. I'm going to talk about it at two levels. One, in terms of, if you will, Muslim-Christian relations globally. And then, because I can never resist it when I have a fair number of Muslims in the audience, I will talk about the challenge as I see it to the Muslim community. Something which I'm often invited to do, and something which I know that when people don't like what I hear, then they say, why do we need to listen to him? He's not a Muslim. So it's a sort of interesting, you're in a very good situation. If you like what I say, you can say, it's amazing how a non-Muslim can, the kuffar got it right. On the other hand, if you don't like it, you can say, aha, what do you expect from him?